The LA Clippers look slightly different going into next season. Coming off a historical playoff run for the franchise, the team lost their superstar Kawhi Leonard for presumably the entirety of next season as a result of an injury. And as a result of not having that powerhouse player, a lot of people are counting out the Clippers for 2022. However, I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment and remain optimistic about this team. I'm so optimistic, in fact, that I'd go as far as saying that the Clippers are still a lock to finish in the top 8 in the Western Conference standings next season. I'll be explaining why I believe that in today's video by looking over the Clippers' expected 2022 roster, the evidence we have to suggest that this team will still be solid at least next season, and why I overall believe they are better than the majority of the teams in their respective conference. Before we start, if you're new here and enjoy the video, be sure to subscribe. For more NBA content like this, I'm trying to reach 18,000 subscribers, so all support would be greatly appreciated. Anyway, with that all being said, let's talk about the LA Clippers. Firstly, let's take a look at some of the off-season moves that the LA Clippers made these past couple of months and how those plays will assist them as they look to make another playoff berth. The first big move that the Clippers made was re-signing Reggie Jackson, which was a fantastic move on their behalf. The Clippers seemed like they may lose Jackson after he had a monster playoff run, potentially not having enough cap room to sign him on again. But in the end, they were able to keep him, and that's a huge W for them. The duo of Jackson and Paul George is going to be great if they continue the play that they had together in that playoff stretch without Kawhi. And they're a big reason why I see the Clippers remaining in the playoff picture next season. Last year, Jackson averaged 11 points per game as the third option on LA on solid shooting splits of about 45, 43, 81. But that doesn't really display how brilliant he was for them in the important moments. Reggie Jackson took over big time in the playoffs and became the consistent third guy that the Clippers had been missing for the past couple seasons, stepping up to average nearly 18 a night on 48, 41, 88 shooting splits during the playoffs. When Kawhi went down with an injury against Utah and didn't return for the remainder of the season, Reggie took another leap again and averaged over 21 points per game and 4.4 assists to help keep the Clippers competitive during that time, and as a result, it helped them reach their first Western Conference Finals in their history. With Kawhi out for presumably all of next season, the Clippers will need offense, and Reggie Jackson has proven he can be a consistent high-level scorer to run the offense through to fill that void somewhat. I doubt the 20 points per game streak does continue for Reggie, but certainly he can average somewhere between 15 and 20 a night behind Paul George, a player he has proven to be an effective duo with. His play will be extremely beneficial for Paul George and LA as it diversifies their offense and takes some strain off of PG. For a team looking to remain in the playoffs, that will be very important, and it's why I wholeheartedly believe that Reggie will help keep the Clippers in the playoff picture throughout the 2022 NBA season. Another player that the Clippers added to this roster recently, and was quite shockingly out of nowhere too, was Eric Bledsoe. In order to get him, they had to trade the heart and soul of the team, Patrick Beverley, which again was quite a shock. And while some may question this move for the Clippers, I think overall the addition of Bledsoe is a great one for LA. Bledsoe is a solid guard defender, so he helps LA keep that identity that Beverley used to bring. But what Bledsoe can also provide is playmaking and offensive talent in general. In that sense, he's an upgrade over Pat Bev, because again, the Clippers are really going to need that extra offense with no Kawhi for the foreseeable future. Bledsoe will probably be in a similar role to what he had on the Pelicans last year, maybe a bit bigger, so expect him to give the Clippers at minimum 12 and 4 a night on hopefully some better shooting splits. Though I would attribute some of the poor shooting he had last season to the Pelicans' severe lack of spacing. Overall though, it's a solid pickup for the Clippers, and in my eyes, will do more good than bad when it comes to trying to keep their playoff streak alive. So those are the big off-season moves that I wanted to focus on for today for the Clippers. But obviously, there are plenty of other elements on this roster that will contribute to them running it back. So let's get into some of those players now. The obvious one that we have to talk about is Paul George, who completely shut up all of his doubters with a phenomenal playoff run. PG looked like an MVP caliber player at times out there for the Clippers, and I think NBA fans got a real good look at what PG can play like as a number one option, something they may have forgotten about since he left Indiana and OKC. In the playoffs, Paul George elevated his game to average numbers of 27 points, nearly 10 rebounds, and over 5 assists. He was so great that playoff run, yet it feels like those figures aren't getting talked about nearly enough. And then you look at his numbers without Kawhi for those last 8 games. Borderline 30 points per game, 11 rebounds and 5.6 assists through those 8 games. That is simply ridiculous stuff. Will he average those numbers throughout next season? Probably not. But I don't think we should consider that play as a fluke and act like PG can't make it happen again. As the number one option again, and with a coach that clearly is able to utilize PG well in Tyronn Lue, George could leap into MVP caliber form like he was in on OKC before his shoulder problems emerged. If anyone is to take the Clippers back to the playoffs, it's Paul George, and I reckon we will see him step up when his number is called in 2022. A player that has a ton of breakout potential with the absence of Kawhi Leonard is Terrence Mann. As I mentioned earlier, the duo of Paul George and Reggie Jackson looks to be solid and should help the Clippers stay afloat in Kawhi's absence. But a player that I think will also contribute heavily to keeping the Clippers in playoff contention next season is Terrence Mann. Mann is one of the more underrated players in the league, and statistically is one of the most impactful players for the Clippers. We saw him shine in Game 6 against the Jazz, where he shocked the NBA world by lighting Utah up for 39 in a comeback win, and throughout the playoffs, he lifted when it mattered the most. Again, the biggest reason why I see him breaking out next season is because of his larger role on the team. When Mann played over 30 minutes per game last season, he averaged numbers of 13.4 points, 5.8 rebounds and 2.8 assists per night, and was able to maintain his efficiency while doing so, still consistently shooting above 50% from the field. In those 15 games that he played over 30 minutes, he also shot a ridiculously high percentage from behind the 3-point line, 46%. While I definitely don't expect that insane level of efficiency to continue when he undoubtedly receives increased minutes next season, I think it does prove that he can still perform at an exceptional level for a role player when given more shots and more court time to shine. Again, with Mann being the likeliest candidate to step up and fill Kawhi Leonard's role next season, as previewed in the past playoffs, it would not be a surprise to me at all if he were able to average numbers similar to those that I just discussed. Something like 13 to 15 points per game on 50, 40, 80 efficiency. And with that, we could perhaps see T-Man as a legitimate candidate for the most improved player and a major X factor for LA in 2022. Two players returning to the Clippers in 2022 are Nicholas Batum and Serge Ibaka. Batum was re-signed during the free agency period, and Ibaka will aim to bounce back after an injury that ended his playoff campaign. The biggest thing that these two players provide to the Clippers, and it's why I'm conjoining them here, is defense. Batum's rim protection and also wing defense can be exceptional, and his underrated athleticism and massive wingspan allows them to put the clamps on his opposition. Batum can also shoot reasonably well, and that spacing has proven to be very beneficial for the Clippers. Ibaka will hopefully be returning ASAP next season, and his absence was clear in the playoffs for the Clippers. His defense was badly needed, like his rim protection, so his return will be crucial for them to stay in the playoff picture in 2022. Finally, the last two players I'll touch on for the Clippers today are Luke Kennard and Zubac. I hope the Clippers use Kennard a lot more now. He was great for them when he got minutes last season. Sometimes he was pretty mediocre to be fair, but if he can get some consistent game time, that'll be beneficial for him and the Clippers. Zubac is also a good pick and roll piece, and the physicality he brings will again be a great addition to the Clippers that they can utilize in their lineups. But those are all the players that I want to talk about today on the LA Clippers. So, how good will the LA Clippers be realistically next season without Kawhi? And why do I still have them as a playoff certainty? Well, to answer the latter, the Clippers' performances in the playoffs without Kawhi gives me a lot of confidence. In those 8 games, they went 4-4, and of course, those wins and losses came against arguably the top 2 teams in the Western Conference last season. Seeing pieces like Reggie Jackson, Terrence Mann, and Paul George mesh together so well was exciting. So for the Clippers to go out and re-sign those key pieces again establishes plenty of confidence in this team that they can do it again in 2022. The Clippers, I think, did a really solid job in the offseason. They got back the pieces they needed and helped cover up Kawhi's absence relatively well on paper. So personally, I think they're a sure thing to at least win 45 games next year. As of right now, I'd say the Clippers are around the 6th to 7th best team out west. I'd place maybe the Lakers, Suns, Jazz, Golden State, and probably Denver too above them currently. Compared to other teams around them or below them, like Portland, Memphis, even Dallas, though to give them credit, I do think Dallas is probably on a similar level to LA at this point. I just feel like the Clippers are a lot stronger on paper than people give them credit for. The West is a bit weaker than previous seasons too, so really to me, I can't see the Clippers falling out of the top 8 at all. Even falling to 8th could be a stretch. Perhaps I would have less confidence in them if Kawhi is all of a sudden injured this past offseason, but again, he was injured in the playoffs. So we've been able to see guys like Reggie Jackson and Paul George lift when he's out in the biggest moments. So I think that sample size, though small, is proof enough for now to give the Clippers some credit and say, hey, maybe they still are a playoff team after all. Overall though, these are my thoughts on the LA Clippers. After a good off-season where the Clippers were able to retain some important elements, the squad looks set up for a good season without their superstar player. Obviously, the Clippers are going to take a couple of steps back. It's expected when you lose a top 5 player for a season, but I don't think this team is going to stumble down the standings all that much. Yes, a Western Conference Finals appearance does seem out of reach, and I agree with that. But I think it would be disrespectful to say that the Clippers aren't at least a chance to get back into the top 8 next season and potentially put some pressure onto the team that they face in the first round. This is still a team with a legitimate All-NBA player on their squad who had just had one of the best playoff runs of their careers. The LA Clippers are not going anywhere in 2022, and I think you might be quite embarrassed if you end up sleeping on them yet again. And that will conclude the video. What do you guys think of this? How good are the LA Clippers to you? Can they remain as a top 8 team out west next season? Let me know all your thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop it a like and subscribe. But with that being said, I am out. Peace.